After Manchester City's 3-0 win over Crystal Palace, the pressure around this title race has completely changed again. Arsenal are still in control, but now the feeling is different. It feels sharper, more intense and honestly more dangerous because Pep Guardiola's side suddenly look alive again at exactly the right moment. And that is what makes the Champions League final against Paris Saint-Germain even bigger now. One thing that needs updating immediately from the original transcript is the injury situation. The fear around Ben White initially looked massive, but reports now suggest Arsenal are more optimistic than they were right after the West Ham game. Jurrien Timber is also pushing hard to return before the final, and there is increasing belief internally that Arteta could have at least one of them available in some capacity. That changes everything tactically because trying to stop Khvicha Kvaratskhelia with makeshift solutions for 90 minutes would have been a nightmare scenario for Arsenal. And now let us talk about the reactions from some of football's biggest names, because this is where things become really interesting. Jurgen Klopp has reportedly praised Arsenal's mentality again in recent days, especially the resilience Arteta's side have shown during the title run-in. Klopp understands better than almost anyone what it means to fight Guardiola over an entire season. He lived that pressure at Liverpool for years. So when he speaks positively about Arsenal surviving the war of the Premier League season, those comments carry weight. What makes Klopp's perspective fascinating is that he sees similarities between this Arsenal team and his great Liverpool side. The intensity, the emotional connection with supporters, the ability to survive difficult moments, and the way Arteta has slowly built a culture instead of just buying individuals. Klopp knows how hard that is, but there is another side to this conversation too. Some people around football are beginning to quietly compare what Arteta is building to the legacies of elite managers like Klopp himself. Not because Arsenal have already won everything, but because they now genuinely look capable of dominating major competitions for years if they finish this project properly. Then there is Carlo Ancelotti. While Ancelotti has not made explosive public statements, people close to the European football conversation know he respects Arsenal enormously right now. And honestly, why would he not? Ancelotti values tactical balance, emotional control, and defensive organisation. Those are now probably Arsenal's three biggest strengths under Arteta. The most important thing about this Arsenal team is not just their attack anymore, it is the fact they can suffer in games and still survive. That is what separates good teams from Champions League winning teams. And that is why this final against PSG feels so fascinating tactically. Luis Enrique has built a terrifying PSG side. Fast transitions, ruthless wingers, relentless pressing, technical quality everywhere. Their destruction of Bayern Munich sent a warning to the whole of Europe. But Arsenal are not Bayern. Bayern tried to go punch for punch with PSG in moments. Arsenal under Arteta are far more controlled. They defend space better. They slow games down intelligently. They force opponents into uncomfortable rhythms. And in knockout football, that matters massively. One of the biggest discussions now is whether Arsenal should approach the final as underdogs or equals. Former players like Thierry Henry and Steven Gerrard believe PSG enter the match as favourites because of experience and attacking firepower. But here is the interesting thing. Being underdogs might actually help Arsenal psychologically. This Arsenal side are far calmer when they are chasing respect rather than carrying expectation. Against Atletico Madrid, they looked emotionally mature. Against big Premier League sides this season, they have shown they can absorb pressure and still stay organised. That mentality is exactly what you need in a Champions League final. And honestly, Pep Guardiola's recent behaviour tells you something important too. The fact he keeps talking about Arsenal, keeps mentioning pressure, keeps discussing difficult fixtures and psychological details shows that this Arsenal side have entered the elite conversation properly now. Guardiola does not spend energy on teams he does not fear. That is why this period feels different from previous Arsenal seasons. The club is no longer trying to convince Europe they belong. Europe already knows. Now it is about whether Arsenal can finish the story. The scary part for PSG is this. Arsenal still might not have played their best football yet. Bukayo Saka is growing into these moments. Declan Rice looks born for elite European nights. David Raya is having one of the statistically strongest goalkeeping seasons in Premier League history. And Arteta himself looks calmer than ever on the touchline, despite the pressure surrounding the club. So when Klopp praises Arsenal's mentality, and when figures like Ancelotti quietly respect what Arteta has built, it is because they recognise something important. This is no longer a young team learning how to compete. This is now a team learning how to win, and that is a very dangerous thing for the rest of Europe. Now let us go even deeper into this final, because the more you analyse it, the more fascinating it becomes. One thing people keep forgetting about PSG is that despite all their attacking brilliance, they are still emotionally untested in moments like this, under pressure. Yes, they have huge names. Yes, they have incredible quality. But this is a club that has spent years carrying the burden of expectation in Europe and falling short when the pressure becomes unbearable. Arsenal actually arrive at this final in a strangely freer emotional position. Think about it carefully. At the start of the season, most people expected Manchester City, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich or PSG themselves to dominate Europe. Arsenal were respected, but many still viewed them as a team developing rather than a finished product. That means Arsenal are entering this final with hunger rather than fear. And sometimes hunger is more dangerous than reputation. Mikel Arteta has also done something psychologically brilliant over the last 2 years. He has slowly normalised pressure inside this squad. Arsenal players no longer look overwhelmed by big occasions. They look prepared for them. Remember where this team was a few seasons ago. People questioned whether Arsenal could even return to the Champions League consistently. People laughed at Arteta during difficult periods. Some rival fans called the project a failure before it had even properly started. There were moments when the Emirates felt disconnected and frustrated. Now look at the atmosphere around the club. The Emirates Stadium has become one of the loudest and most emotionally connected grounds in Europe again. Players speak constantly about the supporters giving them energy. Opponents talk about how difficult it is to play there. Even elite managers now openly praise Arsenal's structure and mentality. That transformation did not happen by accident. Arteta changed the emotional culture of the football club. And honestly, that might end up being his biggest achievement of all. Because tactics matter, transfers matter, coaching matters. But belief changes everything in football. This Arsenal side now genuinely believe they belong at the top table, and PSG know it. You can even hear it in how PSG players talk about Arsenal publicly. There is respect there now. Real respect, not polite compliments. Genuine awareness that Arsenal can hurt them badly. Kvaratskhelia Kvaratskhelia comments after beating Bayern Munich were revealing for exactly that reason. He could easily have spoken only about PSG's achievement. Instead, he immediately acknowledged Arsenal as a difficult final. That tells you Arsenal's reputation inside elite European dressing rooms has changed massively. Another thing worth discussing is the midfield battle, because honestly, this could decide the entire final. Declan Rice against PSG's midfield structure might become the defining tactical story of the night. Rice has evolved into something extraordinary this season. He is no longer just a defensive midfielder breaking up play. He now controls transitions, carries the ball under pressure and dictates emotional momentum in matches. That is rare. Very few midfielders in world football can dominate physically while also calming their entire team psychologically during chaotic moments. Patrick Vieira used to do it for Arsenal. Rodri does it for Manchester City. And now Rice is starting to show those same qualities. If Arsenal win the Champions League final, there is a serious chance people will look back at this season as the year Declan Rice officially became one of the best midfielders in the world. But PSG's midfield is dangerous too. Vitinha has been excellent this season. Warren Zaïre-Emery brings energy and fearlessness. Their midfield rotates aggressively and supports transitions quickly. Arsenal will need enormous discipline to stop PSG from creating overloads in dangerous spaces. And this is where Arteta's tactical intelligence becomes critical. One thing people underestimate about Arteta is how adaptable he has become in knockout football. Early in his managerial career, Arsenal sometimes looked too rigid tactically. Now they look far more mature. They can press high when needed, defend deeper when necessary, and slow games down intelligently. That flexibility is why Arsenal survived Atletico Madrid. Atletico tried to drag Arsenal into emotional chaos. Arsenal refused to lose control. That was a massive sign of growth. Because Champions League finals are rarely won only through beautiful football. Usually they are won through emotional discipline. Can you survive panic moments? Can you stay calm after conceding chances? Can you avoid losing structure when momentum swings? These are the questions that define finals. And Arsenal suddenly look emotionally equipped for those moments. Still, there are concerns. The right-back situation remains scary no matter how optimistic the recent updates are. Even if White or Timber return, nobody knows whether they will be fully sharp physically against PSG. Even tiny defensive mistakes can become fatal immediately. Kvaratskhelia is not the kind of winger who gives defenders time to settle into games. He attacks relentlessly. And then there is Ousmane Dembélé on the other side. When fully fit and confident, Dembélé can destroy defensive structures almost by himself. Arsenal's fullbacks and wide midfield support will need to be nearly perfect defensively. This final could easily become a game of tiny margins. A set piece, a transition, one defensive error, one moment of brilliance. That is why David Raya's form feels so important now. People criticised Raya heavily earlier in his Arsenal career. There were questions about whether Arteta made the correct decision replacing Aaron Ramsdale. But statistically and tactically, Raya has justified Arteta's trust completely. His calmness under pressure now looks vital to how Arsenal build attacks. Against PSG's pressing system, Raya's distribution might genuinely become one of Arsenal's biggest weapons. If Arsenal can break PSG's press consistently, spaces will appear. And when spaces appear, players like Saka, Martin Odegaard and Gabriel Martinelli become devastating. Speaking of Saka, this final feels like a defining moment in his career, not because one match decides a player's legacy completely, but because this is the kind of stage where global superstars are born. The entire football world will watch this final. If Saka delivers on this stage, his status changes forever. People already respect him hugely in England. Arsenal fans already adore him, but Champions League finals create global icons. Football remembers players who decide these nights, and honestly, Saka looks ready for it. The maturity in his game now is unbelievable considering his age. He understands tempo better, he knows when to slow down and when to attack directly. His decision-making in pressure moments has improved massively. PSG will fear him and Arsenal will need him. Then there is Martin Odegaard, the captain who quietly controls everything emotionally for Arsenal. He may not be the loudest personality, but his influence on this team is enormous. Watch Arsenal closely in difficult moments and you always see Odegaard demanding the ball. That matters. In finals, some players hide from responsibility. Elite captains demand it. Odegaard belongs in the second category now. And honestly, one of the most impressive things about Arsenal this season is how many leaders they suddenly have across the pitch. Rice leads emotionally. Odegaard leads technically. Gabriel leads defensively. Saka leads through bravery. Raya leads through calmness. That balance of personalities is incredibly healthy inside elite teams. Compare that to previous Arsenal sides that sometimes relied too heavily on one or two figures emotionally. This squad feels stronger collectively. Now let us talk briefly about Pep Guardiola again, because his recent comments and reactions still matter in all this. The more City chase Arsenal in the title race, the more pressure indirectly gets placed onto Arsenal before the PSG final too. If Arsenal manage to secure the Premier League first, they will enter the Champions League final emotionally free and full of confidence. But if the title race goes down painfully to the final moments, fatigue and emotional stress could become major factors. That is why Guardiola's Crystal Palace victory felt important psychologically. City reminded everyone they are still capable of relentless pressure, and Arsenal now have to respond again. This is the challenge of competing against Guardiola teams. They force perfection from you mentally. Klopp experienced it for years at Liverpool. He knows how exhausting it becomes emotionally. That is partly why his praise for Arsenal now feels so meaningful. He recognises the resilience required just to stay alive in these races. And Carlo Ancelotti, recognising Arsenal's tactical maturity, matters too, because Ancelotti values balance above almost everything. He has coached some of the greatest players in football history, and one thing always stands out in his successful teams: emotional control under pressure. That is exactly what Arsenal are now showing more consistently. The beautiful thing about this entire story is that Arsenal are suddenly carrying both the excitement of youth and the intelligence of experience at the same time. Usually teams have one or the other. Young teams often play fearless football but lose control emotionally. Experienced teams manage games well but sometimes lose energy and unpredictability. Arsenal right now somehow have both qualities. That is why Europe is taking them seriously. And maybe that is the biggest change of all. Not long ago, Arsenal were viewed as a talented project. Now they are viewed as a genuine European powerhouse, capable of winning the biggest trophies in football. The final against PSG is not just about one trophy anymore. It is about whether this Arsenal generation can complete the transformation from hopeful challengers into immortal winners. And if they do it, If Arteta lifts that Champions League trophy after everything this club has gone through over the last 2 decades, then this season will be remembered forever, not just by Arsenal supporters, but by football fans across the world. Because football loves stories of rebuilding. Football loves redemption. Football loves young teams growing into greatness. And right now, Arsenal are standing one step away from completing one of the most powerful stories in modern football.